Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very glad to be able to interact with all of you around questions and conversations around the politics and ethics of platform labor in this hybrid manner. So my name is Aditi Surie. I'm a researcher at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements and a doctoral candidate at the University of Cape Town. And my southern locations as a researcher and as a doctoral student are very important to how I ask moral and ethical questions of the platform. My presentation today is titled Staying on the Platform, Worker Identified Reasons to Continue Platform Work in Bangalore. And while I don't have slides with me today, I will speak through some of the lived experiences of platform service providers that I've been speaking with and trying to represent for many years. Today, what I try to do is navigate around a tricky question. Why do people stay on platforms or come back to them, despite this mounting evidence that platform work is exploitative, that swings in income create extremely difficult conditions for households to maintain themselves. There are high degrees of surveillance, and especially in the last year, platform workers have been mandated with public service and essential services without the dignity or stability that ought to come with that. It is also a difficult question to represent as an academic in India, where my positionality in the platform economy is cemented as an upper-class female consumer and observer. As a sociologist, I ask, what participant observation can there be when the nature of interaction between researcher and participant is structurally set to privilege the former and disprivilege the latter? None. But I speak and write from the abject awareness of this positionality, and one which has been made even more clear during the pandemic. Nonetheless, the question of why people choose to stay on the platform or return to it is an important question. And much of the ways I've tried to deal with both the limitations of my positionality and how I build knowledge is to try and understand what are the right ways of locating the empirical life world of the platform worker to understand their labor market decision-making in city labor markets in India. So my doctoral work takes the city as a site, a backdrop, the materiality of what makes life difficult or easy, or makes work dignified or undignified, stable or unstable. And in piecing this together, I find it is one of the only ways to counter the placelessness of much of the academic debate around the future of work, or precarity that is inspired from a business model that creates a legal distance between the platform service provider and the platform framed through full employment. This doesn't dismiss the techno-precarity that is coded into the algorithmic system or forms of platform capitalism. Rather, it looks to find its interactions and the multi-directional ways in which pre-existing forms of precariousness interact with the platform system. And so for me, the city allows me to witness how we have parallel technological revolutions at play within the same neighborhood. We have the city forms a spatial backdrop to the vulnerabilities that structure the life of platform service provider. It bears witness to the job anxieties of that are taking undercurrent to the way most of young India circulates in the city. It is the regional ecosystem for innovation, and the lens of the city allows me to hold, in my understanding, disparate facts of its existence, its migratory pull, its centricity in the way people bear and manage risk, its deep-rooted histories of community, work, and livelihoods. And for me, it allows me to look at the platform for the legacies it must contain, the logistics it solves for, and the logics it must contend with. And I found in my concerns around the placelessness of the debates of the future of work, are concerns that Southern urbanists have also felt when writing about cities. And this parallel allows me to bring some of these disciplinary questions to speak to each other. I find much of the conversations in academic debates around the future of work are built through northern presumptions around careers, full employment, affordances that come from the identity of work. And I think this has created a scenario where we don't know enough about the everyday realities of other kinds of workers in the world. And we also don't know how to generate inquiries, concepts, and ethnopolitical locations that shape technological thought and practice from the South. And this is something I hope to contribute to. And from what I can see from the conference schedule, many others like me are also trying to contribute to that. So in my attempt in my PhD is then to understand how people working in Bangalore use the platform as an option in their labor market decision-making, what structural factors affect this, how affect and humiliation and emotion, how that shapes work decisions, how sectoral dynamics of the service sector shape expectations. And while of course academically these can be teased out, they're otherwise part and parcel of the thinking, evaluating, and decision-making that people go through in choosing work. I've spoken to about 130 platform workers over the last 5 years. And I have spoken to workers in 3 different segments of the platform economy. What I speak through today is evidence from platform taxi drivers who have, since 2014 and 15, made very large investments into buying cars to make them eligible to be part of the platform labor market. And they work exceptionally long hours once they are afforded that opportunity. And this approach has allowed me to witness certain kinds of interactions between how they differentiate between the platform economy, the informal economy, or different forms of work. And this really brings out what ways in which they conceptualize precariousness. And so many of my initial conversations in 2015, when I started doing my doctoral work, was to understand stories around asset ownership, because it was a fairly novel fact for this magnitude of people who have now become platform drivers to be buying cars and buying assets, while asset ownership was mostly reserved for different classes in India. And so stories around that asset ownership started to reveal conversations and decision-making around what previous forms of assets to mortgage, or how to take loans, and how to finance these new assets that drivers needed to be part of this labor market. And many of the stories that emerged from then were how drivers who were the early adopters of the Uber and Ola mobility platforms were those who had rural land to mortgage. They had rural households that were surviving on an urban income combined with meager earnings from agricultural produce. And this was at a time when Uber or Ola had not created the financial ecosystem that exists today. There were not cars that drivers could just rent from platform companies. There were not financial tie-ups between banks, car manufacturers, and platform companies. So people had to be able to take loans from a bank of their own financial identities. And in creating this financial identity, they were able to use their rural land to do so. And I think in some ways, what I get to share with you today, the insights have a history to them. Much of my initial insights into this area of work came in the initial phases of platform growth, where incomes are very high. And since then, we have seen incomes fall and fall greatly. From 2015 to 2017, there was a phase of platform growth where wages were high. Drivers could earn up to 100,000 rupees a month. And by the end of 2017, beginning to 2018, incomes were halved to around 50,000 rupees. And in 2021, where the market has obviously been affected by the pandemic, and the calculations of supply and demand are all out of sync, most drivers are only earning around 30,000 rupees. This creates an empirical context where I ask, given the unstable wages and the long hours of work and the high amount of risk put into asset ownership, why do Bangalore drivers persist on platform work? Or why do they continue to persist on platform work before the pandemic. And a lot of what I've learned has come by speaking to drivers as they wait for rides to come in, and what they think about in these interstitial moments as work is coming to them. And what I learned is that they think about rain. Bangalore is a city that gets a lot of rain. It has topographical features that create an environment where it's a plateau. I get and experience many months of rain, but the regional economy that the city is embedded in doesn't. Significant parts of Karnataka have experienced drought over the last 10 years, and these regions are semi-arid, and irrigation here is farmer-led and not government-led. So in my research, about 1/4 of the drivers who were early adopters of the platform were able to mortgage their village land to come work on Uber and Ola. So they weren't just migrants who came to the city for work, but they were climate distressed agrarians whose land fell in large semi-arid zones of Karnataka. Several of the drivers from rural backgrounds in the study were from districts such as Mandya, Hassan, Raichur, Gulbarga, that depend on heavily rain-fed crops like rice, paddy, and sugarcane. These areas have become climatic hotspots, a phenomenon caused by small landholdings, continuously falling rains, lack of irrigation, and other institutional facilities. Since Bangalore is the state's primate urban center, most people have to come to the city in search of work. This agrarian migrant community, however, is mostly cut off from the formal work opportunities in the city's industrial, IT, and ITES sectors, and they remain restricted to the informal sector. Karnataka especially has a lot of dynamic migration, people who move between city and village in short periods of time. And this is because of their dependence on rain-fed agriculture and the fact that the state is small enough to make this journey a regular commute. As a migrant enters the city, they must draw upon their networks, their community ties, their kinship networks, and linguistic communities to find work, find a place to stay, and make ends meet. These enabling community ties are used to survive and thrive, but people also bear the consequences of ascribed identities and lack of power symmetry associated with these. They structure how work is found and negotiated, how the terms of service, job longevity, working conditions can vary with changes in these relationships. So experiences of precarity, vulnerability, and poverty overlap with caste, community, and gender, impacting tangible and intangible returns. Dignity, self-respect, and their contrary, humiliation, are used as the boundaries of labor market decision-making in a southern city like Bangalore that is defined by social infrastructure or intimate networks of people as infrastructure. For individuals who have to contend with negotiating their worth, work, and welfare with each work interaction in the urban informal economy, the digital labor market can offer a novel work experience. The digital labor market, as set up by mobility platforms, offers an alternative labor market to plug into without reliance on relational economies or incurring social debt. This offers mobility workers an alternative to the informal labor market where social discrimination can dominate experiences of structuring work. Drivers often say that they leave the city during the rains, not because they don't like to drive in the rain, which also they don't, but because that's when they sow and tend to their land. And that's when the people who they've left in the rural households need their help the most. It's in this constant movement between the city and village that structures how they have to make their decisions around work. They want to be able to find work where they are not answerable to people, where they don't have to incur the social debt of leaving a job that they found using a particular network. The digital labor market then can remit earnings, a degree of predictability, a distance from ascribed identities that govern work negotiations, and act then as a plug and play work option. In the livelihoods transition between the rural countryside and the city, the digital labor market acts as a resource to be tapped into and withdrawn from. It offers a route to bypass the more feudalistic codes of conduct that govern work interactions in the informal economy. It offers a labor market where no one is asking you when you're coming back to work, nor any relatives or community members that are feeling burnt because you've had to leave when the rain has come. The way platform drivers interact with the platform is then as a short-term strategy and adaptation to climate distress. which is an example of the consequences of technology that are particular to the global south. Ola's head of strategy for drivers told me in a conversation and interview that they were laying out a program over the next quarter to pull young men out of Mandya, a district close to Bangalore, a district suffering the effects of climate-distressed agriculture, into the city. Their plan was to roll out cheaper car loans, fleet cars, to extend access to hostels or affordable housing for the first few months on the job, and guarantee some work and some earnings. And I wonder how far this can be treated as a case of Southern exceptionalism, where semi-arid areas of the African subcontinent share similar patterns of movement, concerns around livelihood transitions, and similar urban markets that act as emerging markets for tech companies.